We're here with another bird and or another animal, and we're in a bird place. What are we talking about today?
Birds.
Birds. So we are talking about birds. All right. Well, tell us a little bit about them.
Well, they're amazing creatures. What do you think of when you're thinking about birds?
When I think about birds, obviously flying, feathers. I think of skinny legs. I think of eggs. So those are some of the things that come to mind. I think fast. You know, that someone can be falcons and some of those fast birds I think about. So
yeah, the number one thing you mentioned was flying. They're designed from the ground up for flight. You know,
so they're
everything
actually designed for flight. Everything about them.
Well, certainly that's what the evidence suggests.
Okay.
So, you know, just for instance, when you look at the bones,
Okay.
our bones and mammal bones are pretty solid. You got the marrow in here, and solid, and all the bird bones have hollow bones. And you can see, this looks like a structure. I'm an engineer, and this looks like something you would 3D model and do finite element analysis to design, but this is inside all the birds. And so this gives them incredibly lightweight. You know,
well, I'm thinking it's lightweight, and I'm thinking at Thanksgiving when I look at the bird bones that are broken usually, or anytime I have like a goose or something like that, that they're absolutely hollow. Yeah, that makes sense now. And so it keeps them lighter, keeps them buoyant, definitely. So,
but they're you know, definitely strong enough for the purpose. That they put a lot of stress on them. That's why you have all these beams and girders in there. But they're strong where they need to be, and just designed ideally when scientists or engineers look at that.
Yeah, kind of like when we build a high rise, we build it with great support. They have support, but also it's not overweight. You know, just like if you built a building with too much weight on top, it would fall down, right? It would crush the support on underneath it. So you've got to have strong enough support for that on top, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be like us. That's amazing. Amazing.
And so even engineers have studied that structure and learned from it.
Wow. And you're an engineer, so you know.
Yeah, I'm in a different field.
No, that's okay. But I'm sure engineering is broad, but you just kind of get a base study of some of that stuff. So.
And so another thing is the lungs are designed very different from ours.
Okay.
Our lungs are pretty heavy, and the air comes down into these tiny little air sacs where carbon dioxide from the blood goes through a thin membrane into the air, and the oxygen goes into the blood. It works beautifully for us.
Okay.
But the birds have a much more efficient system. What they do when they breathe in, 3/4 of the air just goes into these chambers and hollow bones and air sacs, and 1/4 of it goes into the lung. Then when they're breathing out, all that air comes in and gets processed. So even when they're breathing out, they're still getting fresh oxygen.
Gotcha.
And then instead of these little air sacs, they have capillaries set up where they're stitched together, and air goes through one tube, blood goes through the other tube, and they've got thousands, maybe millions of these tiny tubes in the body.
Gotcha.
And they're set up in counter-current flow, which is something I deal with. That's the most efficient system that they could have.
Gotcha. Awesome.
So here's a peacock feather. When you look at that, does anything immediately come to mind, a feeling or...
Well, I see a lot of things that come to mind. The color, obviously, I'm always drawn to blue, but then I'm looking at these and it almost looks like there's a bunch of strings that like you almost you yarn like, or, you know, the other thing I think of when I think about that is like a filter for like a vacuum, you know, kind of those tight circles that you use to put around like a filter. So,
Well, Charles Darwin wrote to a friend of his, Asa Gray, who was a Harvard botanist. So they'd write letters across the ocean.
yeah.
And he said that when I look at the feather in a peacock's tail, when I gaze at it, it makes me sick. And, you know, can you imagine this making you sick? I think most people would be thinking about the beauty of looking at the peacock.
Yeah.
But Darwin's trouble with it was he was very good with imagination. If you read his book, Origin of Species, he always talks about the evidence, how it looks like it's designed and everything, and then you'll switch gears and say, but in my imagination. But he couldn't even imagine a story
Behind that, eh?
and so that it bugged him about the eye design for a long time. Then he kind of gave up on that, but this one was still bugging him.
Gotcha.
But
Is there a practical use for the feather being that way?
well, we don't know. So the story was always it was for mating.
That makes sense. Kind of wave it out, and yeah.
Certainly makes sense.
We see that with other species of birds where they put their feathers up, try to look pretty, and
Right.
Find their mate. So
At least some studies were showing that the quantity or brightness or whatever, it didn't seem to be having an effect on the selection.
gotcha.
So I think there's probably some debate on that.
Okay.
Still. But certainly it gives us something to appreciate.
Oh yes, very pretty. A lot of cool things.
And it's not only that feathers design, they're laid out in a pattern, with lots of different feathers.
Yeah,
a
they're
specific pattern.
very
It obviously takes some design to go into that. And so there's about a dozen different kinds of feathers.
Okay.
We think of flight feathers.
Yeah, the wing.
Primarily.
Yeah.
But
Down, my favorite that I sleep on at night
yeah,
from a goose.
and
Got the tail feather, which obviously is a little different to help it with flight.
mhm.
Contour. What's the difference between a contour and a wing?
So it's at the edges. It's also it's for flight, but it's not providing the main strength and thrust. It's kind of airflow.
Complementary.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so if you look in the design of the feather, you got this main shaft, the rachis, and then all these barbs coming off of it and barbules. And it's just an incredibly complex. There can be 1 million tiny parts in there. And it has all these sliding joints, which is a very,
Had a spider joint is there.
yeah, need a bird to come eat it.
Exactly.
So it's strong but incredibly light. And with these moving joints, you always need lubrication. And so the bird's provided with a gland in its back, and he knows to go get some with his beak. And
I always wondered where that comes from. So the gland is actually on their back, and they grab it and help spread it out throughout their feathers.
And so the bird has to know it's there and know when to do it and everything too.
Yeah, makes sense. Wow, that's amazing.
And they have incredible eyesight, both for distance and color. They have a lot more rods and cones, so they see some colors that we don't see.
Gotcha. That's interesting. Where you got the vision of what they see versus us, very different. Yeah. Interesting.
And an eagle can see prey like a rabbit from a couple miles away.
Isn't that crazy? To think about, they can see this, football fields away, they can see this rabbit or this mouse, go after it like an owl or a bird,
Yeah.
eagle or whatever. I'm always amazed. Yeah.
And another thing that's amazing is the migration patterns of some of these birds. So this guy, the parents go up to Alaska and lay some eggs,
Okay.
and they hatch. The parents take care of them for about 5 weeks.
Okay.
They're big enough now to
Fly.
not maybe starting to fly.
Okay. Starting to be able to move on their own.
But they're able to get their own food, and the parents just take off and leave them there. So the chicks just keep growing.
Okay.
And then one day when they're big enough and strong enough and the winds are right and everything, they decide to take off. And they fly 2,500 miles nonstop to a tiny island, Laysan, in the Pacific, in the Hawaiian island chain. And then rest there for a while and fatten up again. But, how can that...
How would they know to go to that one island in all the ocean? They know to go to that one island
Yeah.
to find refuge. That's amazing.
And if you make just a tiny little error, one way or the other,
Yeah, you're completely off.
yeah,
Yeah, 1 degree.
you run out of gas at some point. And they're almost out of gas energy from their stored fat at that point. So, they're designed to get just enough to make that flight.
Well, that's awesome.
And then they fly another 2,500 miles to some of those other islands.
In South America. Huh.
And then they come back, and the whole process starts over.
Wow. That's amazing. Just absolutely amazing to think about how they do that, and they know they do that. Wow.
And so, it's discussed in the Bible about the birds' migration. Jeremiah 8, it says, even the stork in the sky knows their appointed seasons, and the dove, the swift, and the thrush observe the time of their migration. But my people do not know the requirements of the Lord. So,
Even he acknowledges them. Yeah.
yeah.
Amazing.
And so it certainly, if you're given the choice of thinking, well, maybe on one hand they're created and the Creator gives them all this knowledge. The other theory that's believed by many is just that, well, it's blind luck, they...
Yeah, happenstance.
Yeah.
But nothing seems to be happenstance.
The entire universe came around, and then life appeared on its own. That violates almost all the laws of conservation of matter and energy, law of biogenesis.
Well, a whole bunch of them. I mean, and then the odds. You got to do mathematical odds. You got to have 2 of every species. How they have to be able to mate.
Every step of the way is
Very
really
questionable.
a possibility.
All for them to try to not to acknowledge that possibly there's a God. Isn't that amazing to me? So they go through a lot of loops to try to prove that. Well,
have you heard the theory of dinosaurs turning into birds?
turning into birds? No, I've not.
Over millions of years. That's been popularized in recent years.
Okay.
That over millions of years.
They disappeared into birds?
Right.
Okay.
In fact, you'll hear T-Rexes are still around. They're chickens now. And so you'll
That really doesn't make sense, but okay.
get these kind of cartoons of starting with the dinosaur. And then number 2 and 3, what they don't mention here is there's no physical evidence. It's all imagination. Well, there must have been something.
Well, it's all imagination, because when I even look at like this and I'm thinking like how big that bird all of a sudden looks from dinosaurs, I mean, like that reminds me of like Lord of the Rings almost. So where the birds come down and grab Gandalf and the things. Yeah, you know, that's all make believe. So I don't even know how somebody would have to. Again, seems like a lot of mental gymnastics to get to there for me.
Yeah,
So
because it's not. There's a very superficial. They kind of stand in a similar posture sometimes, maybe,
but the thing is
every system has.
we've been alive now and we've been recording history for thousands of years, and we've not seen anything that even comes close to that.
Mhm.
So that just doesn't make any sense. So what do we got here?
So this is Archaeopteryx, which was promoted as a. So they found this dinosaur Sinocalliopteryx. It means Chinese beautiful feather, and they didn't really find feathers. What they found was these little hair-like structures,
Okay.
which they think were going to evolve into feathers, say millions of years later, and then evolve into a bird millions of years after that. Now, what those could be is just fibers from scales. We see that kind of thing happening out in the desert when the scales are out in the sun and decomposing. But anyway, they found a Sinocalliopteryx that was preserved so well they could see the stomach contents, and it had two birds that looked like that, like fully modern birds
Gotcha.
that it had had for lunch, and then it got buried right after that by a big pile of mud, and then he fossilized.
So we saw the birds in there.
Yeah, and so there's no need for him to evolve into a bird. There's plenty of birds around.
Perfect. So no. Again, very odd that people always find it interesting that people think we evolved from anything. It's just been very odd. There's not been really much you could really even grab in the 2, 3, 4,000 years that we've been writing history. So interesting. All right.
Yeah.
What else you got there?
Well, that's about it. I do have a scripture from Job 12 that I think is relevant. But ask the animals, and they will teach you, or the birds in the sky, and they will tell you, or speak to the earth, and it will teach you. Let the fish in the sea inform you. Which of all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every creature, and the breath of all mankind. You know, that he's saying that all creatures really know who their creator is, and we should too, and worship him. All of creation really.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank
Let's
you.
go catch another one.
Sounds good.
You're safe.